hard truth is simple, but almost no one wants to meet it directly. Discipline begins where comfort ends, not where life feels inspiring, not where the room is warm, the body is rested, the mind is calm, and the path is easy. Discipline begins at the border, where the body starts bargaining, where the mind starts inventing excuses, where fear becomes clever, where comfort whispers that stopping is reasonable. That is the place every serious warrior culture understood. The Spartans knew it in the dust on the Agage. Roman legionaries knew it under the weight of shield, armor, stakes, tools, rations, and forced marches that could grind a weak man into silence before the battle even began. Samurai knew it in the long discipline of posture, blade, breath, and obedience to death before death arrived. Vikings knew it in the cold sea, where hesitation could drown a man before an enemy ever touched him. The Mongols knew it in the saddle, in hunger, in distance and weather, in the absolute refusal to let weakness become a private religion. Modern life has trained people to believe comfort is the natural condition of being alive. History disagrees. For most of human memory, comfort was not a right. It was a rare pause between demands. Hunger was normal. Cold was normal. Pain was normal. Obedience to reality was normal. The body was not treated like a fragile idol that needed endless reassurance. It was treated like an instrument that had to be hardened, sharpened, and commanded. The ancient warrior did not ask whether he felt ready. Readiness was not a mood. Readiness was the result of being broken into form by repetition, pressure, hierarchy, and consequence. You did not become disciplined because you wanted self-improvement. You became disciplined because the world would punish anything less. This is what modern comfort quietly erased. It did not simply remove suffering. It removed the old relationship with suffering. It taught the modern person to see resistance as a warning sign instead of a training ground. It taught him to interpret discomfort as damage, boredom as oppression, discipline as cruelty, and sacrifice as some outdated relic from a harsher age. But every empire, every war band, every hard school of survival was built on the opposite assumption. The Spartans did not send boys into hardship because hardship was poetic. They did it because fear must be confronted before the battlefield, not during it. Rome did not build legions out of speeches. It built them through drill, punishment, formation, road building, camp discipline, and a chain of command that crushed personal preference beneath collective survival. The samurai did not meditate on death as decoration. He studied death so that panic would have less territory inside him. The Mongol warrior did not become terrifying because he was comfortable. He became terrifying because he learned to move through hunger, distance, weather, and uncertainty as if these things were not interruptions, but conditions of existence. At the center of all of this is a brutal idea. Comfort does not reveal who you are. Comfort hides who you are. It allows weakness to remain theoretical. It allows fear to stay unnamed. It lets the ego tell stories about courage it has never had to prove. A man can imagine himself brave while sitting safely indoors. He can imagine himself disciplined when nothing is demanding discipline from him. He can imagine himself strong while every inconvenience is removed before it touches his skin. But history did not respect imagination. History respected proof. The body on the march, the hand on the oar, the boy sleeping cold, the soldier holding formation, while arrows darkened the air, the warrior standing still, when every animal instinct screamed or run. That was proof, not what a man claimed, not what he intended, what he could endure when comfort disappeared. This is why discipline has always carried an almost existential weight. It is not merely a habit, it is a confrontation with the part of you that wants to collapse. It is the deliberate training of the self against itself. The enemy outside the walls has always mattered, but the first enemy is internal. Fear, laziness, vanity, impulse, complaint, self-pity, the hunger to be seen, the need to feel safe before acting. Warrior cultures understood that if a man could not command himself, he could not be trusted with a shield, a horse, a blade, a brother, a city, or a cause. Discipline was not decoration. It was the foundation of trust. Without it, courage became noise, brotherhood became sentiment, strength became performance. And that is the wound this title opens. Discipline begins where comfort ends, because comfort is the place where the false self survives. The false self says, I would be stronger if life were easier. History says the opposite. The hard man was not formed because life was easy. He was formed because life gave him no permission to remain weak. The Spartan boy did not become Spartan in comfort. The Roman recruit did not become legionary by being understood. The samurai did not dissolve his ego by protecting it. The Viking did not earn honor by avoiding the cold. The Mongol did not cross continents by waiting for perfect conditions. They were shaped at the edge, where the body wanted relief, and the code demanded continuation. The modern viewer must understand this before anything else. This is not nostalgia for violence. It is not worship or brutality. It is the recognition that human beings lose something essential when they are never forced to wrestle with necessity. Comfort can be useful, but when it becomes the highest value, it begins to weaken the soul. It makes fear louder. It makes discipline feel unnatural. It makes ordinary hardship seem unbearable. And slowly, a person becomes dependent on conditions that history would have considered luxurious beyond imagination. So the question is not whether ancient warriors were harder than modern men. In many obvious ways, they were forced to be. The deeper question is what part of us dies when everything is arranged to protect us from struggle. What part of courage disappears when pain is treated as an enemy instead of a teacher? What part of discipline fades when every desire is answered too quickly? History's toughest warrior cultures left behind more than weapons, tactics, and legends. They left behind a warning. When comfort becomes your master, fear becomes your ruler. And the only way back is through the place you keep avoiding. The first law of every serious warrior culture was repetition, not inspiration, not emotion, not the sudden fire that rises in a man after hearing a speech. Repetition, the same movement until the body obeyed before the mind had time to argue. The same march until the feet stopped asking for mercy. The same formation until individual fear was swallowed by collective order. The same draw of the bow, the same cut of the blade, the same tightening of armor, the same obedience to command. In Rome, the legionary was not trusted because he felt courageous. He was trusted because he had been drilled until discipline replaced hesitation. He could build a fortified camp after marching for miles. He could carry tools, weapons, rations, and armor while still being expected to fight. He could stand in formation, not because he was immune to fear, but because his training had made obedience stronger than panic. This is the first thing comfort destroys. Comfort teaches the body that effort is optional. Repetition teaches the body that effort is law. The modern mind wants novelty, stimulation, and reward. It wants to feel progress before it has earned mastery. But ancient discipline did not care whether training felt meaningful every day. The meaning was hidden inside the repetition itself. A Spartan boy did not need to understand every cruelty of the Mongols to be shaped by it. A samurai apprentice did not need emotional permission to repeat a cut thousands of times. It is a Mongol child did not need motivation to ride, shoot, endure cold, and learn the rhythm of the horse as if horse and body were one weapon. Repetition stripped away the softness of preference. It took the question, do I feel like doing this? And burned it out of the nervous system. Hierarchy was the second pillar. Modern people often hear the word and think only of oppression. But in warrior cultures, hierarchy had a brutal function. It forced the ego into a smaller shape. A man who could not obey could not be trusted to command. A boy who could not submit to training could not carry the burden of responsibility. The Spartan system was built around this principle. The Roman army depended on it. The samurai order carried it into every gesture, every bow, every obligation. The warrior was not free in the shallow, modern sense of doing whatever he wanted. He was free in a harder sense, free from being ruled by impulse, free from the chaos of his own moods, free from the childish belief that his feelings were more important than the mission and the formation, the clan, the oath, or the law. Pain tolerance was not treated as a personality trait. It was cultivated, not because pain was beautiful, but because pain was inevitable. Cold, hunger, exhaustion, injury, humiliation, fear, loss, uncertainty, these were not rare emergencies. They were the climate of life. A culture that expects pain raises people differently than a culture that treats discomfort as a violation. The warrior was trained to meet pain before pain became decisive. This is why hardship appeared early, deliberately, and often. The body had to learn that pain did not automatically mean surrender. The mind had to learn that fear did not automatically deserve obedience. The young Spartan was denied softness so that the adult warrior would not collapse when softness disappeared. The Roman soldier endured punishment and relentless order so that battle would not be his first experience of terror. The samurai contemplated death so that death would not arrive as an unfamiliar thought. Ritual gave this suffering shape. Without ritual, hardship can become meaningless cruelty. With ritual, hardship becomes a language. The tightening of armor, the sharpening of a blade, the shared meal before danger, the silent formation before battle, the oath spoken under pressure, the vow before training, the burial of the dead, the punishment of cowardice, the honoring of endurance. Those acts turned discipline into identity. They reminded the warrior that he was not merely exercising, he was entering a code. His pain belonged to something larger than his private discomfort. His obedience connected him to the dead before him and the living beside him. His fear was not denied. It was placed inside a structure that gave him a way to move through it. This is one of the great differences between ancient hardship and modern struggle. Modern people often suffer without ritual, without code, without shared meaning. They feel anxiety but have no formation to stand them. They feel pressure but no oath to organize it. They feel pain, but no philosophy that tells them what pain is for. So discomfort becomes personal, emotional, and chaotic. The warrior cultures of history tried to prevent that chaos. They took fear and surrounded it with discipline. They took pain and gave it a place. They took the ego and put it under something heavier than itself. The dissolving of the ego was perhaps the deepest principle of all. The ego wants to be special, exempt, praised, protected, understood, and comfortable. It wants glory without the long accumulation of training. It wants strength without submission. It wants respect without cost. Every hard warrior tradition attacked this illusion. The Spartan boy was not treated like the center of the world. The Roman recruit was not allowed to confuse his opinion with the needs of the legion. The samurai was taught that attachment to the self could become fatal. The Stoic was trained to separate what he controlled from what he merely desired. The Viking warrior, bound by honor and reputation, had to live under the judgment of deeds, not intentions. In these worlds, the ego was not nourished. It was disciplined, reduced, tested, and sometimes shattered. Comfort keeps the ego alive by protecting it from reality. Hardship exposes it under pressure. A person discovers how much of his identity is performance. He discovers whether his discipline is real or decorative. He discovers whether he acts from principle or from mood. This is why hardship remains the only honest teacher. It does not care about your self-image. It does not care about your excuses. It does not care how impressive you sounded when nothing was at stake. Hardship asks one question: can you continue when continuation costs you something? And that is where discipline becomes more than routine. It becomes a war against inner collapse. It is the ability to act when comfort is gone, when fear is loud, when the body is tired, when the mind wants escape, when nobody is clapping, when no reward is immediate, when the easy path is open and seductive. The ancient warrior did not become hard because he hated life. He became hard because he understood that life is not protected by softness. It is protected by strength, order, restraint, endurance, and the repeated decision to obey something higher than appetite. The modern world has not removed the need for discipline. It has only disguised the battlefield. The enemy is no longer always standing across from you with a spear or sword. Sometimes the enemy is the warm bed when you gave your word to rise. Sometimes it is the screen that eats your attention. Sometimes it is the resentment that replaces effort. Sometimes it is the fear of judgment that keeps you silent, weak, and unfinished. The old cultures would recognize this immediately. They would not call it a lack of motivation. They would call it a failure of command. A man who cannot command himself has already surrendered territory no enemy had to conquer. Discipline begins where comfort ends, because that is the first place truth appears. Before that point, everything is theory. After that point, the body, the mind, and the will are forced to reveal their real hierarchy. Either comfort commands you, or you command yourself. Every warrior culture left behind stories that were more than stories. They were warnings carved into memory. They showed the young what a human being had to become when comfort was no longer available, when fear stood close enough to smell, when the body wanted escape, but the code demanded stillness. These narratives mattered because discipline is not taught only through instruction. It is taught through images that enter the blood. A boy hearing of Sparta, did not merely learn military history. He learned that softness could be treated as a public danger. A Roman recruit, hearing of the old legions, did not merely inherit tactics. He inherited the idea that endurance could build roads, camps, borders, and empires. A samurai studying the lives of earlier warriors did not merely admire death. He learned that fear becomes smaller when a man has already surrendered his attachment to survival. The Spartan agog remains one of the most brutal symbols of discipline ever preserved in the imagination of the West. At 7, Spartan boys were taken from the household and placed into a system that did not exist to comfort them, flatter them, or preserve their innocence. They were placed under hunger, cold, competition, obedience, and constant exposure to hardship. The point was not simply to create fighters. It was to destroy the illusion that the individual child belonged to himself. He belonged to Sparta. His body, fear, hunger, pride, and pain were placed under the city's command. This is almost impossible for the modern mind to accept without recoil, and that recoil is part of the lesson. Sparta was extreme. It was harsh to the point of cruelty, but hidden inside that extremity is a principle modern comfort refuses to face. If hardship does not train you before the crisis will train you without mercy. The story of Thermopylae became powerful not because 300 Spartans defeated the Persian Empire, but because they stood in a narrow pass, knowing death was not a possibility, but a schedule. Their discipline was not proven by victory. It was proven by staying. That is the part modern culture often misses. We worship success, results, survival, applause. But the deeper warrior code often measured a man by whether he obeyed the code, even when the outcome was already lost. Thermopylae became immortal because it presented discipline stripped of reward. No comfort, no rescue, no fantasy of easy triumph, only formation, duty, bronze, dust, heat, exhaustion, and the refusal to let fear decide the final posture of the body. Rome carried a different symbol, not the single heroic last stand, but the machine of endurance. The Roman legionary was terrifying because he was not merely a fighter. He was a builder, marcher, digger, carrier, engineer, an instrument of state power. He could march with crushing weight, then build a fortified camp with ditch, rampart, and stakes, as if exhaustion were irrelevant. The camp itself was a symbol. Every night, order was carved into the earth. Even in hostile land, even after long movement, even under threat, the Roman mind imposed structure. This is discipline made visible, a square of order in a world of danger. The modern person waits to feel stable before acting. Rome acted in order to create stability. It did not wait for the world to become comfortable. It hammered shape into discomfort. The samurai world offers another image, the warrior who rehearses death before death arrives. In later samurai philosophy, the contemplation of mortality was not meant to make a man reckless. It was meant to remove hesitation. A warrior too attached to preserving himself could become slow at the decisive moment. Fear would split him in two. One part would act, the other would cling. So the samurai trained not only hand and blade, but identity. He had to become less owned by the panic of survival. His bow, his posture, his silence, his readiness to die, all carried the same message. The ego is heavy, and in battle, heaviness can kill. The man who must protect his image, his comfort, his pride, and his life at all costs becomes crowded inside himself. The disciplined warrior becomes simpler. not empty in a weak sense, but sharpened, reduced to action. The Vikings carried the symbol of honor under harsh skies. Their world was not soft ground and predictable seasons. It was sea, cold, hunger, reputation, oath, kinship, and the knowledge that a coward's name could outlive him in shame. To the modern person, reputation often means popularity, approval, being liked, being seen. To warrior cultures, reputation meant something harder. It meant the memory of what you did when danger arrived. The Viking did not live in a world where comfort could hide dishonor forever. The sea exposed weakness. The raid exposed hesitation. The shield wall exposed whether a man would stand beside others or leave them open. Fear was expected. Flight was judged. Honor was not a feeling. It was behavior under threat. The Mongols reveal another kind of discipline, one born from vastness. The steppe did not reward softness. It rewarded movement, adaptation, hunger management, horsemanship, coordination, and terrifying speed. Mongol warriors learned to ride from childhood, to shoot from the saddle, to survive with little, to communicate across distance, to turn mobility into psychological pressure. Their discipline was not the stone discipline of Sparta or the engineered discipline of Rome. It was fluid, severe, relentless. They could cross distances that broke the assumptions of settled armies. They turned hardship into advantage because they had not been raised to need the comforts their enemies depended on. This is a devastating lesson. The fewer comforts you require, the more dangerous you become to those who require many. Even the Stoics, though not a warrior culture in the same sense, carried the inner version of this code. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while facing war, plague, betrayal, political pressure, and the decay of certainty. His discipline was not displayed only in armor or conquest, but in the private refusal to be ruled by complaint. The Stoic battlefield was judgment, desire, fear, anger, grief, and the endless human temptation to demand that reality be easier than it is. Stoicism did not promise comfort. It trained the mind to stop begging reality for gentleness. It asked the human being to separate what can be commanded from what must be endured. That distinction is one of the deepest forms of discipline ever taught. These stories endure because they all point to the same hard center: the Spartan pass, the Roman camp, the samurai death meditation, the Viking shield wall, the Mongol steppe, the Stoic journal written under imperial burden. Each one says that discipline is not born in comfort. It is born when the old self is pressed against necessity and forced to become something cleaner, harder, less dramatic, less dependent on ease. The symbols differ, but the truth is the same. Fear is not defeated by wishing. Ego is not dissolved by thinking about humility. Strength is not built by admiring strength. The body must be placed under demand. The mind must be placed under command. The self must be brought to the edge, where comfort ends, because only there does the hidden code become visible. The ancient battlefield has changed its clothing, but it has not disappeared. The modern man does not usually wake to the sound of horns beyond the city wall. He does not tighten armor before sunrise or take his place in a shield wall while another army gathers across the field. His enemies are quieter now, and because they are quieter, they are easier to underestimate. Comfort enters through the bed, the screen, the endless meal, the soft excuse, the postponed decision. the small lie that says tomorrow will be different without anything being demanded today. The modern battlefield is not less dangerous because it lacks swords. It is dangerous because it asks for surrender without looking like war. This is where the old lesson becomes practical. Discipline begins where comfort ends because modern comfort has trained the body to retreat at the first sign of friction. The alarm rings and the body negotiates. Work becomes difficult and the mind searches for distraction. A difficult conversation approaches and the ego builds a strategy of avoidance. The room becomes quiet and anxiety fills the silence because the mind has forgotten how to stand still without stimulation. This is not weakness in some dramatic, cinematic sense. It is worse because it is ordinary. It is the daily loss of command. It is the slow transfer of authority from the disciplined self to the comfort-seeking self. The warrior cultures of history would not have needed complex language to describe this. They would have seen it immediately as a failure of training, not a failure of potential, not a failure of identity, a failure of training. The body has been trained to expect ease, so it resists effort. The mind has been trained to expect stimulation, so it resists silence. The ego has been trained to expect protection, so it resists correction. This is why the solution cannot be merely inspirational. Inspiration is too soft to carry a person through repeated discomfort. What is needed is a return to deliberate friction, not as punishment, but as a restoration. In modern life, deliberate friction begins with keeping promises when nobody is watching. That is the smallest form of the ancient oath. A Roman soldier did not become reliable in battle by improvising courage at the last moment. Reliability was built long before crisis in repeated obedience to structure. The same is true now. If a person says he will rise at a certain hour and immediately betrays that command, he teaches himself that his word has no weight. If he says he will train his body and abandons the effort as soon as it becomes uncomfortable, he teaches his body that discomfort is stronger than decision. If he says he will focus and then gives his attention away to every digital interruption, he teaches his mind that it is no longer under command. This is not about becoming brutal for the sake of brutality. It is about rebuilding trust between command and action. Discipline is self-trust made visible. Every time you do what you said you would do when comfort argues against it, you recover a small piece of authority over yourself. Every time you avoid what must be done, you lose that authority. The loss may be invisible at first. No one may punish you. No one may notice. But the deeper self notices. It remembers every surrender. It remembers every time you chose ease over the code you claimed to live by. Eventually, a person does not merely lack discipline. He stops believing himself. The practical meaning of hardship, then, is not misery. It is proof. Training when you are tired proves that tiredness is not command. Working when you are bored proves that boredom is not command. Remaining calm when insulted proves that ego is not command. Choosing silence instead of complaint proves that discomfort does not own your tongue. Finishing what you began proves that a mood does not rule your future. These are not small things. They are the modern equivalents of holding formation. Most people collapse not in one great defeat, but through thousands of tiny permissions. They give themselves permission to delay, permission to complain, permission to be distracted, permission to quit early, permission to remain soft while admiring strength from a distance. The ancient code does not require us to copy ancient cruelty. No modern person needs to romanticize the violence, harshness, or injustice of warrior societies to extract their central truth. The lesson is not that life should be made savage. The lesson is that a person who never meets resistance becomes unprepared for reality. Comfort is useful when it restores strength. Comfort becomes poison when it replaces strength. Rest after work is different from escape before effort. Recovery after discipline is different from indulgence instead of discipline. The difference is command. Are you using comfort, or is comfort using you? This distinction matters in the real world because every meaningful ambition eventually becomes uncomfortable. Building a body becomes uncomfortable. Building a business becomes uncomfortable. Learning a skill becomes uncomfortable. Telling the truth becomes uncomfortable. Saving money becomes uncomfortable. Leaving behind weak habits becomes uncomfortable. Protecting your attention becomes uncomfortable. Becoming someone serious in a culture of distraction becomes uncomfortable. There is no path of depth that does not eventually require a person to pass through boredom, fear, repetition, criticism, sacrifice, and loneliness. The modern lie is that the right life will feel easy. History says the opposite. The right life often feels difficult because it is demanding the death of the weaker self. The ego will fight this process. It will say, you deserve comfort. It will say you have already suffered enough. It will say discipline is extreme. It will say tomorrow is better. It will ask for balance when what it really wants is escape. This is why ancient traditions surrounded the individual with ritual and structure. The lone ego is a poor commander. It needs rules, repetition, environment, consequence, and reminders. A modern person must build these deliberately. He must reduce the number of battles he leaves to mood. He must create conditions where discipline is not a heroic exception, but the default path. The phone away, the body trained, the work begun before negotiation, the promise kept even when the emotion is absent, the hard conversation faced before resentment grows teeth. In this way, the old warrior lesson becomes painfully relevant. Your life may not demand that you cross the Alps, hold a pass, ride across the steppe, or stand in a shield wall, but it does demand that you stop fleeing the smaller hardships that reveal your character. It demands that you stop calling comfort peace when it is really avoidance. It demands that you stop confusing ease with freedom. The undisciplined person is not free. He is ruled by appetite, fear, mood, and convenience. The disciplined person may appear restricted from the outside, but internally he has recovered something rare: command. And command is the beginning of strength. Not loud strength, not theatrical strength, not the strength that needs to be announced. The quiet kind, the kind that wakes when it said it would wake, works when it said it would work, endures when endurance is required, refuses to make a throne out of comfort. That kind of strength is available now, but only at the old price. You must cross the border where comfort ends. You must stand there long enough for the weaker self to panic, argue, and finally lose authority. Only then does discipline stop being an idea and become your nature. In the end, the lesson is not complicated, it is only difficult. Discipline begins where comfort ends because comfort is the first false king most people serve. It speaks gently and never arrives like an enemy. It does not kick down the gate or stand across the field with a weapon in its hand. It enters as relief, convenience, delay, entertainment, justification, and the promise that you can become strong later. It tells you that avoiding discomfort is the same as protecting yourself. It tells you that ease is peace. It tells you that discipline can wait until the conditions are perfect. And while you believe it, something inside you grows weaker without making a sound. History did not have patience for that illusion. The old warrior cultures were often harsh, sometimes cruel, and never innocent. They were not models to copy blindly. They understood something modern life works very hard to hide. Human beings are not strengthened by endless permission. They are strengthened by demand. They are not sharpened by comfort without consequence. They are sharpened by pressure, repetition, restraint, service, silence, and the willingness to endure what the weaker self wants to escape. The Spartan pass, the Roman camp, the samurai blade, the Viking ship, the Mongol saddle, the Stoic page written under the weight of empire. These are not dead images. They are reminders. Each one says that strength is not discovered in the imagination. It is forged under conditions that strip imagination away. A man does not find out whether he has discipline when he is arrested, praised, warm, and untested. He finds out when the alarm cuts through sleep, and nobody would know if he betrayed himself. He finds out when the work becomes boring, and the mind begins looking for escape. He finds out when fear rises before a decision that must be made. He finds out when his pride is wounded, and he wants to answer with noise instead of control. He finds out when the body aches, when attention scatters, when the easy path opens, when comfort offers him a soft exit and asks only one thing in return: surrender command. That is the real battlefield now, not because modern life is the same as ancient war, but because the human weakness underneath has not changed. Fear still bargains, ego still lies, appetite still commands, laziness still disguises itself as wisdom. Comfort still tells the undisciplined man that he is being kind to himself when he is actually abandoning himself. The weapons have changed. The nervous system has not. The struggle for command remains ancient. This is why history matters, not as decoration, not as masculine fantasy, not as a museum of violence and iron. History matters because it shows what human beings once accepted as the cost of becoming reliable. It shows that discipline was not always marketed as a lifestyle choice. It was once survival, identity, duty, and honor. It was the force that allowed men to stand beside one another under pressure. It was the force that allowed cities to be defended, roads to be built, seas to be crossed, fear to be contained, and suffering to be given meaning. We traded much of that for comfort, and in many ways, comfort gave us safety. But when comfort became the highest value, we forgot the older truth. Safety without discipline becomes fragility. So the call is not to worship suffering. It is to stop running from the forms of suffering that would make you stronger. Stop treating discomfort as a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is the proof that something is finally being corrected. The burning lungs, the silent hour of work, the difficult conversation, the resisted temptation, the disciplined morning, the money now wasted, the body trained, and the screen turned off, the ego swallowed, the promise kept. These are not small acts. They are the modern rites of passage. They are how a person rebuilds the inner command that comfort has stolen piece by piece. You do not need a battlefield to become disciplined. You need a boundary where the weaker self is no longer allowed to rule. You need a code that is stronger than your mood. You need repeated proof that fear can speak without being obeyed. You need to meet hardship deliberately, for life forces hardship upon you without warning, because life will do it. Sooner or later, comfort will end without asking your permission. The body will tire, money will tighten, people will leave, work will demand more than motivation, fear will arrive, loss will arrive, pressure will arrive, and when it does, you will not rise to the fantasy version of yourself. You will fall to the level of training you have actually lived. That is the warning the old warriors left behind. Not that every man must become a soldier, not that cruelty is wisdom, not that pain alone makes a person noble. The warning is sharper than that. If you never command yourself in small discomforts, you will not suddenly command yourself in great ones. If you keep kneeling to comfort, fear will not need to defeat you. It will only need to wait. So begin where the truth begins. At the edge, at the moment you want to quit, at the hour you want to delay, at the silence you want to fill, at the task you keep avoiding, at the pain you keep calling unfair, at a discipline you keep admiring but never practicing. That is where the old self starts to die. That is where the stronger self begins to breathe. Not in comfort, not in fantasy, not in words, in the act, in the repetition, in the refusal, in the moment you choose command over ease. History is not just stories of men who were harder than us. It is the memory of a discipline we traded away, then forgot we ever possessed. But what was lost can be rebuilt, not all at once, not through motivation, not through pretending, through the oldest method there is. Face the discomfort, keep the promise, repeat the act, dissolve the ego, and return tomorrow. Comfort will always call you back. Fear will always explain why surrender is reasonable. The weaker self will always ask for one more exception. Do not give it one, because discipline does not begin when life becomes easy. It begins exactly where comfort ends.